This happened about 2 years ago during a work trip to northern Colorado. At the time, I was working for a company that installed and inspected industrial equipment. Every few months, they'd send me somewhere for 2 or 3 days, usually to small towns where there weren't many places to stay. This particular trip was supposed to be easy. 2 days of work, 1 night away from home. Then I'd drive back. Hotels in the area were ridiculously expensive because it was the middle of ski season. So I started looking at Airbnbs instead. After about 20 minutes, I found one that looked perfect. It was a small cabin just outside town. The listing had dozens of 5-star reviews. The pictures showed a modern interior with large windows overlooking the woods, a stone fireplace, and a small covered porch. It looked quiet, private, exactly what I wanted. After spending all day around loud machinery, the host accepted my reservation within minutes. He sent me a short message. "Welcome. Check-in is completely self-service. The key will be inside the lockbox next to the front door. If you need anything, don't hesitate to message me." Everything felt normal, professional. Nothing raised any red flags. I arrived just before 7 in the evening. The sun had already disappeared behind the mountains, and the last few miles were nothing but narrow roads, winding through thick pine forests. I remember realizing I hadn't passed another car in nearly 10 minutes. The cabin sat by itself at the end of a gravel driveway. There weren't any neighboring houses within sight. Just trees, hundreds of them. The place looked exactly like the listing. Warm lights glowed through the windows. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. It honestly looked inviting. The key was exactly where the host said it would be. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The first thing that caught my attention wasn't what I saw. It was what I smelled. Fresh coffee. Not the stale smell of coffee that lingers in a kitchen. Fresh coffee, like someone had brewed it less than an hour earlier. I smiled to myself. The cleaners must have just left. That seemed like the obvious explanation. The house was spotless. The floors looked freshly mopped. The kitchen counters were clean. The bathroom smelled like bleach. Fresh towels were folded neatly on the sink. Everything looked perfect. Almost. When I walked into the kitchen, I noticed a ceramic mug sitting beside the coffee maker. It was empty. There was a small brown ring at the bottom where coffee had dried. Without thinking, I picked it up. It was still warm. Not hot, just warm. I stood there for a second, then shrugged. Again. The cleaners. I rinsed the mug, unpacked my groceries, and carried my suitcase into the bedroom. That's when I noticed the wardrobe. Everything else in the house looked modern. Minimalist furniture, clean white walls, simple decorations. The wardrobe looked like it belonged in another century. Dark oak, heavy brass handles, intricate carvings across both doors. It almost seemed too large for the room. Mostly out of curiosity, I grabbed one of the handles. Locked. I tried the other door. Also locked. I laughed. Guess that's where they keep the owner's stuff. I unpacked my clothes and completely forgot about it. Around 8:30, I ordered dinner from a local burger place. The delivery driver arrived about 40 minutes later. He handed me the food, looked past me into the house, then back at me. "You staying here by yourself?" he asked. "Yeah." He hesitated, only for a second. Then he nodded. Have a good night. Something about the conversation felt off. Not enough to worry me, just enough that I remembered it later. After dinner, I watched television for a while. Before getting ready for bed, I made sure the front door was locked, checked every window, turned off the lights, then climbed into bed. The cabin was incredibly quiet. No traffic, no neighbors, no distant city noise, just wind moving through the trees. Sometime during the night, I woke up. My eyes opened instantly. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I didn't hear anything. That was the strange part. The house was completely silent, but I had this overwhelming feeling that someone else was inside. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't something I saw, just that instinctive feeling that makes every hair on your arms stand up. I reached for my phone. 17 a.m. I listened for another minute. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself I was just in an unfamiliar place. I rolled over and somehow managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, I got dressed and left for work around 7. The entire day was uneventful. By the time I drove back to the cabin, it was already getting dark again. I unlocked the front door, walked inside, and immediately stopped. The smell of fresh coffee filled the house again, exactly like the night before. I walked straight into the kitchen. The coffee maker was completely clean, empty. The sink was empty too. No mug, no coffee grounds, nothing. I actually checked the trash can, empty. I stood there for several seconds, trying to figure out where the smell was coming from. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it disappeared completely. I couldn't smell anything anymore. I laughed at myself. You're just tired. That had to be it. Work had been exhausting. I made dinner, took a shower, and sat on the couch watching random videos on my phone. Around 10, I got up to plug my phone in for the night. That's when I realized my charger wasn't beside the bed anymore. I searched the bedroom. Nothing. The bathroom. Nothing. Finally, I found it plugged into the outlet behind the couch in the living room. I stared at it. I couldn't remember putting it there. I honestly couldn't. But memory is a strange thing. I figured maybe I'd charged my phone there while unpacking and simply forgotten. Before going to bed, I messaged the host. Quick question. Is the wardrobe in the bedroom supposed to stay locked? His reply came less than a minute later. Yes, it's been locked for years. Nothing to worry about. I read the message twice. Something about it felt strangely rehearsed. Still, it was a reasonable answer. I locked my phone, turned off the lights, and climbed into bed. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I found myself looking toward the wardrobe. I couldn't explain why. It was just an old piece of furniture, nothing more. Eventually, I closed my eyes. A few hours later, I woke up again. This time, because I heard something, a soft metallic click, coming from the bedroom. I opened my eyes. The room was dark. I looked toward the wardrobe. One of the doors was slowly opening. I didn't move. I kept staring at the wardrobe, trying to convince myself my eyes hadn't adjusted to the darkness yet. The room was lit only by faint moonlight coming through the window. The wardrobe door wasn't opening quickly. It was barely moving, slow enough that I couldn't even hear it anymore. I reached for my phone. 18 a.m. The flashlight illuminated the room instantly. The wardrobe doors were closed. Completely closed. I just sat there, still holding my breath. After another minute, I got out of bed and walked over to it. I grabbed the handle, locked, exactly like before. I stood there for another few seconds before climbing back into bed. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I was already convincing myself that I'd dreamed the whole thing. Stress, long work days, an unfamiliar place. There had to be a logical explanation. I left for work earlier than usual. The entire drive, I kept replaying what I'd seen. By lunchtime, I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. By the time I returned that evening, I wasn't thinking about the wardrobe anymore. I unlocked the front door. Everything looked normal. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter, set my backpack beside the couch, walked into the bathroom to wash my hands. It couldn't have taken more than 30 seconds. When I came back, my backpack was standing beside the front door. I stopped walking. I stared at it for several seconds. I knew exactly where I had left it. I even looked at the floor beside the couch. There was still a small wet mark from the bottom of the backpack, where melting snow had dripped onto the hardwood. The mark was still there, but the backpack wasn't. It was by the front door. I looked around the house. Nobody. Every window was locked. The front door was still locked. Nothing looked disturbed. I picked up the backpack, told myself I was simply exhausted. I honestly started wondering if I was forgetting things because I wasn't sleeping enough. That thought bothered me more than the backpack itself. Losing your memory is a terrifying thing to imagine. That night, I decided to test myself. Before going to bed, I took several pictures with my phone. One of the living room, one of the kitchen, one of the bedroom, mostly to prove to myself that nothing was changing. It felt ridiculous, but it also made me feel better. I left my shoes beside the bedroom door, placed my backpack against the wall, closed the bedroom door, and went to sleep. I woke up sometime before dawn, not because of a noise, because of light. A narrow beam of light was shining beneath the bedroom door. I frowned. I knew I'd turned every light off. I slowly sat up. The light disappeared. The hallway outside became dark again. I stayed perfectly still, waiting. Nothing happened. After several minutes, I opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. The kitchen was dark. The living room was dark. Every light in the house was off. I checked the front door, still locked. I checked every window, locked. Then I remembered the pictures. I opened the photo I had taken of the living room before going to bed. At first, everything looked identical. Then I noticed something. The picture showed the hallway door completely open. I looked up. The hallway door was closed. I frowned. Maybe I'd closed it afterward. I opened the second picture. The kitchen. Everything looked the same. Almost. The wooden chair beside the dining table was facing the window in my picture. Now, it faced the table. I actually smiled. I was relieved. Finally, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Someone had moved it. I wasn't imagining things. I immediately messaged the host. Has anyone entered the house? No reply. I sent another message. I know someone has been inside. Still nothing. I called him. Straight to voicemail. That was the first time since arriving that I actually felt afraid. Not nervous, afraid. I packed my suitcase immediately. I wasn't planning to spend another night there. Before leaving, I called the local sheriff's office. 2 deputies arrived about 20 minutes later. I explained everything: the coffee, the wardrobe, the backpack, the pictures, the missing reply from the host. One of the deputies looked skeptical. The other asked to see the bedroom. He spent several minutes examining the wardrobe. Then he knelt down. "Come look at this." Near the bottom of the wardrobe, there were tiny scratches around one of the wooden panels. Fresh scratches, as if it had been removed many times. The deputy carefully pulled at the panel. It came loose. Behind it, there was a narrow opening. Not a room, not a tunnel. Just enough space for someone to crawl between the walls. The deputy aimed his flashlight inside. I still remember the expression on his face. He didn't say anything for several seconds. Then, "Someone's been living in here." Inside the space were canned food, water bottles, blankets, a flashlight, phone chargers, batteries, even a small camping stove. Dust covered everything, except one blanket. It looked recently used. One deputy immediately called for backup. They searched every inch of the property, the attic, the crawl space, the surrounding woods. Nothing. Whoever had been there was already gone. While they searched, another deputy found something else: a small spiral notebook. Every page contained dates, names, short notes. Some pages had dozens of entries. Most looked like guest names. Beside each name, there were handwritten observations: older couple, travels with dog, business trip, leaves early, heavy sleeper. The deputy kept turning pages. Then, he stopped. My name. It was there. My stomach tightened. I had booked the Airbnb less than 24 hours before arriving. Next to my name, someone had written, "Arrived alone. Checks every lock. Sleeps lightly." I felt sick. Those weren't details from my reservation. Someone had watched me. The deputies collected everything. Before leaving, one of them asked for permission to contact Airbnb. I agreed. A detective called me the following afternoon. He sounded confused. "There's something you should know." "What?" "The account that rented you the property." He paused. "It shouldn't exist." I didn't understand. The verified owner sold the cabin almost 3 years ago. So, who was messaging me? "We don't know. The listing has been removed multiple times over the past 2 years, but it keeps coming back. Different email, different payment account, different identity, same photographs, same cabin, same host profile picture, same automated messages." Nobody could explain how. The detective told me something else before hanging up. The hidden space inside the walls wasn't built later. It had been part of the original construction. Someone had designed that house to watch the people staying inside it. The investigation eventually went cold. No fingerprints, no DNA, no suspect, nothing. I tried to move on. Eventually, I stopped thinking about it. Until 6 months later, I received an email from Airbnb. The subject line read, "How was your stay?" I almost deleted it. Instead, I opened it. Everything looked completely normal. At the bottom of the email was a familiar sentence: "Your host hopes to welcome you back soon." I clicked the host's profile instead of an error. The page opened. The listing was gone. The reviews were gone. Only the profile remained. Beneath the profile picture, one line appeared: "Active just now." I closed the page immediately. About an hour later, My phone buzzed. It was a notification from Airbnb. One new message from the host. I don't remember opening the conversation. I don't remember reading it more than once, but I'll never forget what it said. You noticed the wardrobe this time.